Good afternoon. Today I examine various types of book lending facilities that existed in Belfast during the 19th century. The information is derived from extant resources, some of which are kept here in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. I will outline the purpose or objectives of each type of book lending facility before exploring what these facilities offered, the genres of reading material that were available for readers, and finally to discover details about people who set up, organised or borrowed from these facilities. The talk concludes with a more in-depth examination of Belfast Reading Club. Borrowing books had its origins in the 18th century, and this service expanded during the 19th century. Different types of information on 19th century book lending facilities can be found in primary sources. This is just some of the documents that I found useful in my research. The minutes of organisations were particularly useful. The prospectuses for organisations included information about the committee members and occasionally about the number of books that they held or the titles that they had just received. Newspapers were useful for finding out details about businesses that lent books and provided updates via reports on the proceedings of the annual general meetings. Street directories showed the location of commercial circulating libraries, gave information about organisations and the facilities provided, and once the names of the readers had been discovered, I was then able to find out where the people lived and perhaps a bit more about them. The census for 1901 has also been useful to find out more about the background of the people, their ages, religions and occupations. It was not until October 1888 that the Free Public Library was set up under government legislation and funded by taxpayers, and it opened in Royal Avenue. Prior to that, 4 types of book lending facilities existed within Belfast. The term book club and literary society are used for voluntary organisations that have been set up by groups of individuals for their own use. The Belfast Athenaeum was a leisure facility for gentlemen that the proposers had great difficulty in setting up. There were numerous religious, educational and specialist organisations and employers in Belfast that set up libraries that were solely for the use of the members or employees of the parent organisation. And commercial circulating libraries were set up by businessmen and women who ran shops, and this was an additional service for their customers, and those are the types of organisation I'm going to explore today. The readers were the reason why a book lending facility existed, but I discovered that the people were often a missing element in the archive documentation. However, you may recognise some of these people, Belfast citizens who were book readers. Book clubs. The first type of book lending facility to be examined. Book clubs, as a term, encompasses all voluntary organisations that were formed to lend books to the members. They were formed and used by local people, so they did not advertise or publish information save the proceedings of their AGM. Some built up a library collection which was added to as and when the club could afford more books, while others purchased 1 or 2 books that circulated amongst the members for a set time. Then the book was balloted to raise funds for further purchases. So that was the 2 ways the book clubs operated. In some book clubs there was also a social element. A satirical poem written by Charles Shillitoe in 1788, the Country Book Club, would have readers believe that the local book club was considered to be a social club, where reading and books were the last and least important item on the agenda. The wit wrote, "The first business of the club is news, and the members met to dispute, to fight, to plead, to smoke, to drink, to do anything but read." While none of the book clubs in Ulster would openly advertise that they were run exactly on this format, it is known that the consumption of alcohol was part of the activities. However, Belfast Literary Society made it quite clear that their members would not be drinking any strong liquor. This slide lists 13 voluntary book clubs that Belfast inhabitants could join to obtain reading materials. As can be seen on the slide, the actual names include Lending Library, Reading Society, Literary Society and Book Club. The fees were set, and often these would not change for many years. For example, in Dunmurry, the cost remained static for 14 years. The analysis of books in these 2 book clubs show that Dunmurry only stocked history, biography, travel and novels, while borrowers in Derraghy could select from a much wider range of genres. Some of the titles stocked in Derraghy Library, or more correctly Derraghy Reading Society, are shown on the screen. Some are educational, while others are entertaining. There are biographies, poetry, political titles, books for self-improvement, travel books, as well as novels. It was the stock that attracted readers to one facility over another. Dismayed that the Belfast Reading Society would not stock novels, George C. Heinemann, who was an auctioneer, set up the Belfast Library at 1 Talbot Street in 1825, and Edmund Getty became one of the committee members. But this rival organisation only enjoyed a brief existence. So the library, or the book clubs came and went, and it's hard to sort of put them all together. Some of them there for a year, some of them there for hundreds of years, and they still exist. So it's very hard to kind of put it all together in a very short space of time. The Belfast Reading Society, later renamed the Belfast Society for Promoting Knowledge, this institution now familiar to us as the Linen Hall Library, was founded in 1788, and its early members were notorious for their links with the United Irishmen. Martha McTeer, known for her social commentary, was scathing about the class of borrowers from this book lending facility. However, the society itself considered it to be the place where the wealthier citizens frequented, so it was all a case of perception, or perhaps that things changed over the years. This slide details the activities and connections of 5 members of the Belfast Society for Promoting Knowledge. So you can see that those people were people in Belfast that had good connections, were well educated, and probably come under the second quotation rather than Martha's observation. Belfast Literary Society was founded in 1801 by 12 local men. Its function was mutual communication on literary subjects and the investigation of the antiquities, political economy and history, natural and civil, of the county of Antrim. My research in primary sources has uncovered the names of 224 people who were members of the Belfast Literary Society during the 19th century. This slide shows the location of the facility moved around the houses of the various members. Henry Joy was proprietor of the Belfast Newsletter and the owner of Cronach Paper Mills. Dr. James MacDonald has been described as a physician, a geologist and a lover of science. Mr. Knox was probably John Knox, a watchmaker. Dr. William Bruce was minister of First Presbyterian Congregation and principal of Belfast Academy. Mr. Comine was a surgeon, and Dr. Samuel Martin Stevenson was a physician and minister of the Presbyterian Synod of Ulster. That's just to give you a flavour of who the people were that belonged to that club. Ruth Bowen Bales observed that in Belfast there were networks within and between societies, and suggested that individual members use these links to support a variety of activities and to provide and share resources and information. John Bew referred to them as a small but mobile group of cultural zealots. Investigations show that book borrowers of the Belfast Society for Promoting Knowledge were also members of the Belfast Literary Society. By collecting information from disparate sources, book reader biographies can be built up. And actually in their own biographies, very often they mention that they were a member of a book club is not in there. So you have to actually go back to the sources to find out whether they were members. It's not actually written up in their biographies. Now we come to the second type of book lending facility, which was the Athenaeum. In literature, Belfast is often referred to as the modern Irish Athens, or the Athens of the North. So it was quite fitting at the time had an Athenaeum. Athena, the snake-haired warrior, was renowned as the Greek goddess of arts and wisdom. She was therefore regarded as an appropriate figurehead for institutions that provided education, reading and other leisure facilities, that disseminated knowledge and provided places where arts in their various forms could be enjoyed. The Greek Athenaeum was a place where the intelligentsia met, read and shared their learning on scientific and literary subjects. Athenaeum were a hybrid organisation, drawing inspiration from mechanics institutes, educational establishments and voluntary organisations. But it was thought that the Athenaeum ought not to compete with the college, but with places of public amusement. In other words, the social element. The idea of developing an Athenaeum in Belfast was first suggested in December 1811. It was proposed that each subscriber would receive a share in the property, which could then be sold or inherited. But as the Belfast Society for Promoting Knowledge refused to donate their library to this proposal, it was put on hold. The Belfast Athenaeum, having to overcome financial difficulties, was not actually established until 1867. In Ireland, each Athenaeum evolved according to the needs of the local community, thus developing its own characteristics rather than following the same blueprint. In Belfast, it was the perceived lack of organisations disseminating scientific knowledge for the working classes that propelled this Athenaeum enterprise. An alternative to the public house was also a factor that the middle classes and clergy supported. Now you can see it says recreation and refreshment. That's the focus of it, not the books. The establishment for the Athenaeum continued to be debated, and in 1845 a new document was produced and circulated in an attempt to garner support for the enterprise, and this document is actually available in the Public Record Office here. The Belfast Athenaeum was eventually established, but the advertisements show it was more a recreational facility than a place for scientific learning. In 1867 there was the intention of adding a coffee room, reference and circulating libraries and a gymnasium in the future. But 3 years later the institution consisted of a reading room with a valuable reference library, smoke and club rooms, and members had the use of the lavatory. This last facility was considered a luxury at the time, so it would appear that the inclusion of a gymnasium was never realised. The committees also organised visiting speakers and public entertainments to raise funds. However, little is known about the premises at 22 Castle Street, Belfast, but it would appear that these premises were hired out for the use of other clubs and organisations in Belfast. These include the Belfast Amateur Rowing Club, the Royal Belfast Yacht Club and the Belfast Musical Society. The Belfast Athenaeum was also used as a correspondence address for personal adverts. However, the Athenaeum did not continue to meet the recreative needs of the people in the later stages of the 19th century. New forms of entertainment, such as cinematography, grew larger crowds than a scientific talk, so the days of the Athenaeum were numbered. In 1872, the Belfast Athenaeum premises in Castle Street were to let. That's all we know really about it. Organisations that were already established set up libraries at a later date in order to provide an additional service for their members. In most cases, the book borrowers had to be members of this parent organisation. Membership of a book lending facility was regarded as being a rational recreation and did not come in for attack by those who considered that morals in society needed to be improved. Libraries were set up by religious organisations and churches, schools, improving organisations aimed at the working classes, specialist societies such as the Medical Society, and employers like the Belfast Gas Office. You can see the variety there. This extract comes from the minutes at PRONI, Church Records 1/1P/1/2/1, and provides much information about this book lending facility set up by a church. We learn that Derraghy Parochial Young Men's Christian Society Library was set up on the 17th of November 1847, and there were 9 men present. The book lending facility was to be called the Derraghy Library, which is much easier to say, and the rules of Derraghy Reading Society were to be used. As to the occupations of known members, William Alderdice was a summons server, Henry Boomer was a sexton in the Church of Ireland, William Crone was a bleacher, and William John McBride was a rate collector. That's just a sort of snapshot of the membership there. The minute book of this facility shows that the collection comprised of 191 books, but of this number, only 99 titles were actually borrowed. It would appear that the most popular books in this facility in 1856 were Natural History by Oliver Goldsmith. Volume 4 was borrowed 10 times, and Volume 3 was borrowed 9 times, and various volumes of Jonathan Swift also frequently appeared. organisations developed their own libraries to meet with their needs. Members of the Belfast Medical Society set up their library in 1806. John Derraghy highlighted its function. The medical library was formed in 1806 by a number of the most respected physicians, surgeons and apothecaries. Admission was not confined to Belfast or its vicinity. Practitioners from different parts of the country are members of it. This establishment must contribute to the improvement of medical science, as it affords an opportunity of consulting books too expensive for many individuals to purchase. Since its establishment, some rare and very great variety of other books, which have been published within the last 20 years, relating to medicine, surgery, pharmacy and chemistry, have been purchased. The library provided access to more information than the medics could be expected to obtain privately, and they had access to what were in some instances probably the only copy available in Ireland. So it was a very important library. Commercial circulating libraries were described by Thomas Kelly as a service provided by booksellers for their private profit. The stocking of books for loan within a commercial setting was beneficial for the proprietor, as it was a relatively easy way to increase profits. From Restoration times onwards, it seems to have been fairly common for booksellers in London to hire out surplus books. However, the first known circulating library is considered to be that of Allan Ramsay, a well-known bookseller, poet and wigmaker, at his premises in High Street, Edinburgh in 1725. It was to be several years later before a commercial circulating library was set up in Belfast. In 1779, Mr. Warren of Belfast kept one of the most respectable and extensive bookshops in Ireland. His circulating library was perhaps at that time the largest in the kingdom. It would appear that Ulster commercial book lending businesses were operational from the late 18th century. The 40-volume Ordnance Survey memoirs included brief information. The inquirers found libraries, those belonged to booksellers who let out books by the month, and comments that there were tolerable circulating libraries, Dugan's containing 672 works, such as novels. It was the stocking of novels, however, that made these book lending facilities the target of criticism. A circulating library in a town is an evergreen tree of diabolical knowledge, comes from Sheridan's play, The Rivals. It was not just booksellers that decided to lend books to their customers. It can be seen that in Belfast, books could be borrowed from proprietors who sold stationery, patent medicines, wallpaper, sheet music, toys, newspapers and fancy goods, amongst other things. At this time, proprietors provided multiple services. I like the description of Henry Greer's establishment, who on one occasion referred to his enterprise as bookseller and stationer, cricket, archery and general fancy warehouse. As these activities could all be classified as leisure pursuits, perhaps there was a unifying element. B.M. Benedict maintained that circulating libraries enjoyed their heyday between 1790 and 1820. J.R.R. Adams considered that it is difficult to get information on commercial circulating libraries. However, I discovered information on 28 commercial circulating libraries that were in existence in 19th century Belfast from primary sources. The establishments frequently use the proprietor's name in their designation, and also the titles of the places that I discovered. The main advantage of joining a commercial circulating library was that readers were able to access a greater number and range of books than they could afford to buy. It has been calculated that an annual fee of £1 would allow the subscriber to read the equivalent of 100 guineas worth of reading material. The advantage to the proprietor was that they could have the price of their book reimbursed, and thereafter paid loans would be profit. In order for this to be successful, the choice of books had to be in demand, so as the books were in constant loan and not left sitting on the shelves. Looking at the cost of membership at Hodgson's establishment over time, it can be seen that the cost of borrowing for half a year or shorter dropped between 1824 and 1830. Between 1824 and 1830, the membership increased, but between 1830 and 1838, the prices remained constant. In 1830, Hodgson introduced weekly borrowing rates. This may have been because the users found the monthly cost too much to pay in one go and preferred to pay out of their weekly wage when they could afford it. 1838 saw another change as a differentiation between town and country membership was introduced. This suggests that the customers living outside the town boundaries acquired reading material from this circulating library. So it wasn't just the local people that are actually borrowing from here, it was actually coming from further afield. As individual concerns, the proprietors set their own subscription costs and the number of books readers were entitled to borrow. Easton and Sons calculated that their rates in 1898 were comparable to less than 3/4 of a penny per day for the 1-volume option, or less than half a penny a day per volume for the 3-volume option. It is interesting that James O'Neill and Samuel White lent books overnight, perhaps for those visiting town who did not want a long-term commitment, or those who only required occasional reference to a specific book overnight. It could also have been that those on low income could occasionally borrow when they could manage the 1 penny overnight cost. Paying a higher rate, first-class borrowers were allowed new books as these were received. When deciding which commercial circulating library to join, readers would have to consider factors such as opening times, distance from their residence or workplace, or if delivery was indeed available to their area, the contents of the stock, and the waiting time for popular novels. The loss of books meant that the subscriber had to pay the cost of missing items, and the proprietors were adamant that the books were for the sole use of the borrower. No book or books shall be allowed on any account to be transferred from one subscriber or reader to another, but in all cases the person that takes them out must return them to the library. Perhaps this explains why the return dates were deliberately short in circulating libraries that prevented the passing on of books. Earlier I said that the commercial circulating libraries were condemned for stocking novels. From 1863 onwards, there were mentions of the 3-volume novels or triple-deckers. The fashion for this production method was the dominant form for new fiction appearing in England beginning in the 1820s and lasting until the 1890s. Belfast circulating libraries were following a nationwide fashion by distributing these 3-volume novels, but not all the Belfast providers stuck to this pattern. They supplied history, biography and travel like the book clubs. Hodgson provided French language books as these were in demand by his clientele. In fact, this comprised 59 titles, including a 40-volume set on the theatre, very specific. Of the 6 proprietors who described their stock, Belfast Book Club only held religious and scientific books. In the other establishments, novels were also couched under the terms fiction, romance and adventure. It seems that Belfast commercial circulating libraries stocked fiction from 1813 through to 1898. Some added this genre at a later stage, while others advertised it right from the commencement date. Around 1,500 volumes was considered a sufficient number to be carried by a circulating library. However, from what can be established about the size of the Belfast commercial circulating libraries, many were much larger concerns. Hodgson had nearly 9,000 volumes available for loan from his establishment. As commercial concerns, it was common for the proprietors of circulating libraries to advertise in newspapers. In this case, George Phillips published a list of novels he'd added to his stock in March 1853. And you'll notice that several of the titles were written by women for women. The circulating libraries had a sort of an opinion that it was women that would read novels, and this was keeping them back from their work. The commercial circulating libraries were used by middle-class females to acquire the 3-volume works of fiction that were, according to Adams, perhaps a trifle risque. But it was difficult to discover who borrowed from the commercial circulating libraries in Belfast. However, information about one lady book borrower was discovered among the legal notices in the Belfast newsletter in 1869. It concerned the divorce case between Mrs. Annie de la Choise and her husband, Mr. Nicholas de la Choise, of Bally-William House, Donaghadee, on the grounds of cruelty. During the proceedings, it emerged that Mr. de la Choise declined to pay the accounts sent from a circulating library in Belfast. The slide shows her husband's response. It's not him that was the reader, it's his wife. It is not related here how Mr. Etchison felt about this publicity or if his account system was below par. Information on the proprietors was easier to uncover. In 1807, Robert and John Hodgson were running a booksellers at 4 High Street, The business was then to be found at 9 High Street from 1819 through to 1846. Robert Hodgson died on the 17th of December 1818, aged 69 years. Advertisements show that his son John carried on the business himself until an entry in 1852 announced that John Hodgson respectfully begs to offer his grateful thanks to an extensive circle of his friends for favours conferred on him in the way of his business for a very long series of years, and now wishes to intimate that he has resigned business from this date in favour of his brother Robert A. Hodgson. This suggests that it must have originally been run by a father and son, Robert and John, and then continued by their sons in turn. John was involved in the business for at least 45 years. Robert, however, was not as disposed to the book-selling trade, and in 1860 the premises at 9 High Street were up for auction, and Robert was residing at 4 Martha Terrace, Beresford Street, London. Hodgson Entry, near Crown Entry, High Street, was allegedly named after these booksellers. When a new commercial circulating library opened, an advertisement was inserted in the local paper. This advertisement relates to the opening of Morgan Jellett's library in 1830. Jellett was an interesting character. Born in 1769 in Moira, Morgan Jellett began his career as an apprentice attorney and practiced in this profession. During the late 18th century, Jellett joined the ranks of the Belfast Yeoman Cavalry, but in 1830 he was advertising his new circulating library, which he set up at the recommendation of his numerous friends and customers. But this operation does not seem to have lasted for long. Although he ran an advertisement in November 1831, only 11 months later, George Phillips had taken over the premises at 1 Commercial Court, lately occupied by Mr. Jellett, and was running it as a book-selling business and circulating library. So you can see that the establishments were sort of taken over by other people. The free library system was different from the other book lending institutions that have been described thus far. Book clubs were established by local readers who grouped together to pool resources. The Athenaeum was proposed by local citizens. The libraries within organisations were set up by an existing community group, and commercial circulating libraries were set up by enterprising shop proprietors. The public library system was implemented by government legislation. The facility was to be paid for through collection of taxes from ratepayers, and the library building was the first consideration. Legislation stipulated that only towns of 10,000 inhabitants could establish a free public library. So it was not until this was changed to 5,000 inhabitants that Belfast could consider the proposal. Once proposed at council, a vote had to be put to the public, who were after all the funders of the facility. The reasons why a free public library were deemed necessary for Belfast were outlined at a meeting in May 1882. Dr. Drennan suggested that this was not only for instruction or recreation of the inhabitants, but predicted that there would be other advantages of an economic nature. For he believed the spread of information and intelligence and the desire for intellectual acquirements amongst the working classes would tend materially to diminish crime and poverty, and so lessen the demand upon the funds that were necessary for the support of the criminal classes in the community. However, Mr. William Gray, speaking at the same meeting, wanted other facilities to be added to the proposed library. A free library would not be sufficient without an art museum and a proper collection for the study of art students. A technical museum where the artisan could become familiar with the process of art manufactures in other districts was of greatest importance. Meanwhile, Mr. Samuel Monroe, who was president of the United Trades Council, representing the working man, thought that in today's parlance, knowledge would empower the employee. His statement is shown on the slide. An advertisement in the Belfast newsletter of the 31st of May 1883 set out the particulars for a competition to design the library building. Holding an architectural design competition seems to have been the 19th-century competitive tendering process. Prizes of £100, £50 and £25 were to be awarded to the designs graded first, second and third respectively. The winner of the competition was then to be employed as the architect. The results were as follows. Third place was Mr. Johnson from London. Second place went to Messrs. Maxwell and Tuke. But the winning design was by Mr. Lynn of Belfast. The final design of the Free Library building was described thus. The principal font is in Royal Avenue and extends 104 feet. The material to be used throughout is Dumfries stone resting on a basement course of polished granite. The windows and doorways in the ground floor will have semicircular headings. A balcony will extend along the first floor windows which open upon it. The spandrels of these windows will be richly carved. The pillars between these windows will be of the Corinthian order, with capitals richly foliated. A balustrade will surmount the front. When the foundation stone was being laid in 1884, the speeches were full of optimism about the purpose of the new library and the effect it would have on the populace of Belfast. The ceremony was presided by Earl Spencer, who stated that at all times large libraries have been produced when a nation is becoming strong, great and prosperous. It was to be a space for elevating and refining the people, and for preparing them to efficiently carry out the duties devolving on them as citizens and subjects, by providing an appreciative community with food for the mind. But most importantly, Sir E.P. Cowan, chairman of the Library Committee, thought that it would be a common ground where men of all classes and all creeds can meet, free from sectarian prejudices and political strife. The building of the Belfast Library was eventually completed and ready for opening in 1888. It was proclaimed to be unequalled to any building in Ireland. After the library had been entered from Royal Avenue by 3 large doors, the interior accommodation comprised. On the first floor room on the left is the reading room, which is 72 feet long by 30 feet wide. At the end of the room there is a neatly finished lavatory. On the right side is the lending library, the dimensions of which are 72 by 21 feet. This room will have a Spanish mahogany counter at which the books will be given out and taken in. On the right of the entrance hall is situated the librarian's room with a bookstore off it. The upper floors were approached via a wrought iron staircase, and there could be found a student's room 20.5 feet long by 17 feet wide. There was also a library to be filled with bookcases, which is 21 by 30 feet. On the right side there is a ladies' room 21 by 20 feet and also well-finished lavatories. But the principal feature of this floor is the reference library and reading room. Dimensions are 96 by 52 feet. Going up to the stairs to the left is the picture gallery, and on the right side is the second portion of the picture gallery. A report on the opening day on the northern wing described the comfortable seating, the style of the tables and the modern sanitary facilities. Although the luxury of the accommodation may have eventually been detrimental to the library, as it encouraged people to seek its sanctuary, it was more comfortable and warmer than their homes. But as I stated earlier, it was the building that was the focus of the attention, not the books. Unable to purchase every book due to lack of funds, the Library Committee sought donations. In 1888, it was stated that the volumes in their thousands that are there, gorgeous in their garb of golden colour or sober and staid as becomes works dealing with the serious side of literature. There are at present in the library about 7,000 volumes, and at a rough guess there's space for at least 20,000. Even before the building of the library commenced, donations of books were forwarded to the Library Committee. In 1882, the family of the late Sir James Hamilton presented his collection, which consisted of 3,575 volumes, all valuable, many of them rare books. In 1895, Thomas Rigby wrote in Rigby's Illustrated Guide to Belfast in the north of Ireland. The library now contains over 31,000 volumes. Of these, 16,000 are in the lending and 15,000 in the reference department. Connected with the library is an art gallery and a museum of antiquities. In the latter is a very fine collection which was presented to the public by the late Canon Granger of Bridgeshane near Ballymena. The Granger collection, which was given in 1890, included natural history specimens, art objects and antiquities, as well as a library of 3,000 volumes. Another person familiar in 19th century library and cultural circles was Francis Joseph Bigger. His collection of maps, books, manuscripts and pamphlets reflecting his wide-ranging interests was given to the Belfast Free Public Library and is considered to be one of the most important bequests to the library. It was not just local inhabitants that made donations towards the stock of the new library. Isaac Pittman, who lived in Bath and is best known for his shorthand system, made a donation of upwards of 300 volumes, mostly connected to the subjects to which the donor had made a lifelong study. continued to operate as a multifunctional space for books, art and artefacts until the 1930s when the Ulster Museum opened. Although the library was designated a free public library, it cost a penny to receive a form to join the library. The intending borrower had to have this form completed by 2 responsible adults whose names must be on the current Burge's roll and be approved of by the librarian, who were to act as guarantors. So before becoming a borrower, it was important to receive references from 2 local burgesses, which caused problems to some sections of the community who did not personally know such persons. The opening days of the lending library generated great public interest, and on Monday the 12th of November 1888, 411 persons had obtained forms, and a total of 1,007 persons had evidenced their desire to avail of the opportunities and advantages of the lending library by closure on Tuesday the 13th of November 1888. The table on this slide shows a snapshot of the number of people entering the various sections of the library and the usage made of books in the reference and lending departments over the monthly basis there. The number of people entering the various sections fluctuated due to diverse reasons. For example, a new art exhibition would have increased the footfall in that department, while a national or international event might have caused an increase in those wanting to keep up to date with newspaper reportage. An increase or decline in the number of scholars using the facility may have corresponded to the college term times. As to those who were using the library, their backgrounds were observed by the librarian, who formed the following opinion about the users of this facility. And I quote from the Irish Times, the 16th of February 1901. The class most largely represented is that of bookkeepers and clerks, and not mechanics or factory workers, as some might suppose. Next came students, schoolboys and apprentices, then engineers and mechanics, labourers, porters, packers and messengers. The other occupations chiefly represented are as follows: warehouse men and salesmen, linen business, teachers and monitors, juniors and carpenters. Among the learned professions, solicitors and apprentices head the list, clergymen and medical men follow. George Eliot also analysed the age of the library users. He discovered that the library was most popular with those between 14 and 20 years of age, and a fourth range between 21 to 30. This reading facility was therefore claimed by the younger inhabitants of the city. The book clubs in the Athenaeum were considered as social centres and places of recreation, as well as places to borrow books. The public library was also considered to be a recreational space. Although the users of the libraries were obliged to follow regulations, the minutes show that there were few instances of mistreatment of the library space and its contents. I'll give you a few. In 1889, antisocial activities had to be dealt with by the library committee. The town inspector be requested to give directions to the constabulary on duty in Royal Avenue to prevent loiterers at the cover of the free library, as the practice of smoking and spitting about the footways is found most offensive. In 1890, there were problems with undesirables entering the library premises, so the committee recommended that an extra attendant, temporary, be employed for 3 evenings a week to prevent people entering the reference library other than those who wished to consult books therein. Access was monitored, so only genuine users were permitted to enter the library portals. In order to protect the library from misuse, the library committee suggested the desirability of a caretaker living in or in the immediate vicinity of the free library. By the 5th of May 1892, it was resolved that a night watchman be appointed at wages of 16 and 6 a week with uniform, and the hours of duty 9:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m., with the proviso that the appointed person was not to exceed 40 years of age. The following week, the committee selected Francis Crotty of 1 Burke Street for this role. However, by June of the same year, the committee had to discipline this employee for misconduct. The minutes record the librarian was authorised to dismiss Francis Crotty for carelessness in the discharge of his duty. The decision was appealed by the employee, and after consideration, the committee resolved to give him another trial, and he was called in. Warned that should there be any charge of neglect of duty by him in the future, he would be instantly dismissed. Apparently he was fond of the drink. However, despite the best efforts to monitor those who entered the library, it appears to be a continual problem. Another instance is reported in 1899. The librarian reported as to the annoyance caused by drunken persons frequenting the library, and the chairman undertook to communicate with the Commissioner of Police on the matter, with a view of having a constable placed on duty in the library daily. The local constabulary responded by reassuring the library committee that the complaint relative to persons loafing in and around the library would be attended to. So much for it being a recreation space for the public. The advertisement for the position for the librarian requested that applicants be under 45 years of age, and the prospective candidates were asked to forward applications and copies of testimonials. The Committee of Belfast Town Council received 148 applications for the position of librarian. This list was refined to 14 candidates, which the Belfast newsletter pointed out, a great majority of whom were from England and Scotland. It had been proposed that all the local candidates be kept on the interview list, but this suggestion was rejected by a considerable majority. However, this decision led to objections, and a meeting with ratepayers was called. Despite debating the value of having a local person in this capacity, the position was awarded to George Hall Elliott based on his previous library experience. He was a gentleman, then Secretary and Librarian of the Gateshead on Tyne and Wear Public Library. I now move on to examine one book club in more detail. The information about the rules and proceedings were obtained from the minute book, which is catalogued at PRONI as D777/1. The minutes are handwritten by various members of the club in a lined notebook. They affectionately called it our reading club, although its formal title was Belfast Reading Club. The minutes begin with a list of rules and the names of the founder members, so presumably this was the first meeting of the club in 1889. The notes continue through to the 5th of February 1901, when they stopped with no explanation. So we're left to speculate as to whether it folded or if the notebook was mislaid and another one was then used in its place. The members of Belfast Reading Club had to be proposed and seconded. This follows the pattern of many of the clubs in the 19th century. A prospective member had to be approved of and be in good standing in order to be accepted. Most clubs had formal rules and regulations regarding the conduct of members and its organisational methods. There were a total of 11 rules for this particular club, but Rule 10 was unique to the club. It read, "Evening dress shall be optional." The members wrote that they would focus on British authors, but this rule was relaxed as on Monday the 18th of March 1895 the theme was American Authors, Prose and Verse, thus supporting the idea that this was a book club with a social emphasis. Of the 134 meetings recording what book was read, 54 were based on Shakespeare's works. A further 2 meetings were devoted to the parts of Shakespeare's heroines and female characters, and on another evening they read his sonnets. Several titles were read more than once, and others were only read in part. A Midsummer Night's Dream and Henry V featured 4 times. Of the other authors, the works of Goldsmith and Sheridan were the most popular. The Arrivals, which I quoted earlier, was cited as the book read at 5 meetings. The group also read works by Longfellow, Bulwer Lytton, Scott and Carlyle, as detailed on the slide. The group were to meet twice a month for 8 months. This suggests that there should have been 16 meetings held in a year, but again, this rule was not strictly followed. The minutes show that this figure of 16 was never actually achieved. Interest in the book club seems to have waned from 1896 to 1899, as less than 10 meetings were held during these years. Although there were 12 meetings in 1900, the following year the records only run to February and then stop abruptly. Occasionally comments were made about future meetings, but here we can see 2 comments about what authors were to be read and who was to host the meetings in 1889. The Belfast Reading Club had only one office bearer, the president. Most book clubs, although larger in size, had a secretary and a treasurer as well as a committee. Here, the president was responsible for taking the minutes, as can be evidenced by the changes in the handwriting styles. The person appointed as president hosted the meeting in their home. This slide shows the addresses that were noted as the meeting place. By matching the address with a contemporary street directory, it is possible to discover in whose home the meeting was held. The addresses reveal that several of the members were clustered around the Antrim Road area, and known only locally by a house name, while another cohort were in the area surrounding Queen's College in what we would now term the university area. Just a few examples there. Hopefield was the residence of the Right Honourable Thomas Sinclair. Castleton Terrace was the home of Herbert Owen Lanyon, a flax merchant and son of Charles Lanyon, architect of Queen's College, the Harbour Office, the Custom House, and other well-known Belfast landmarks. Loreen was the home of Major Travers Blackley, although only his wife attended the meetings of the Belfast Reading Club as a visitor. This slide shows the notebook entry for the meeting on the 23rd of November 1896. The date, meeting place, and the names of those present, both members and guests, was standard content. The minutes do not record the parts played or read by the members on every occasion. There are only 14 meetings when this information was recorded. This entry shows the parts assigned to the people, suggesting that, as a play, it may have been enacted out. Interestingly, on 3 occasions, in February 1895, the 5th of April 1895, and the 10th of February 1896, the guests outnumbered the members. This is a list of all those who attended meetings, either as members or visitors. Such was the organisation that only 12 people could be members at any one time, but they could still attend the gathering as a visitor. This rule about inviting friends and family were extensively used, and a total of 113 visitors attended the 129 meetings, several attending on more than one occasion. Examination of the minute book shows that only 4 of the original members remained as such for the full 12 years. Several, but not all, of the nominations and resignations were recorded, but in total 34 people were members between 1889 and 1901. Of the 111 meetings where names were detailed in the notebook, the most frequent attendees were 3 members of the Ferguson family. Miss A. Ferguson was present on 96 occasions, her brother Godfrey was there 93 times, and their sister Miss Mary Ferguson attended 90 of the book club meetings. 2 of the members were professors of Queen's College. Professor Fitzgerald was in the engineering department, and Professor Purser, whose interest was medical and science, particularly histopathology. R. Parker was headmaster of Methodist College and lived in the Malone Road. Mr. Platt Higgins lived at Rathcoole, Fort William Park. Mrs. O'Hara lived at Glandore Gardens off the Antrim Road. Captain W. Gilpin was described as a sea captain, and he lived at Glenallen Street near the Albert Bridge Road. This society, in contrast to others, had a predominance of female members. Many book clubs going by the known members were male only. As the names of the members were known, it was possible to find out more about the background of the membership. Using the 1901 census, 31 members of the Belfast Reading Club were identified, and some statistics can be compiled. Ages. 9 members were aged under 35. 12 were between 35 and 45. 7 were aged between 46 and 55, with 3 over 50 years of age when they were attended. This can be explained as different generations of the same family attended the meetings. Occupation. 2 professors, 2 naval captains, an army major, an architect, a solicitor, and 9 Church of Ireland ministers. Religion. 25 were Church of Ireland, 2 were non-subscribing Presbyterians, 1 Church of England, 1 Church of Scotland, 1 Roman Catholic, and 1 Presbyterian. This slide shows the census information relating to the Duffin family who lived at 22 University Square. Using this source and other information, it is possible to learn more about this family of readers. Head of family Adam Duffin was a stockbroker and later took an interest in politics. He was on the committee of the Belfast Royal Botanical and Horticultural Company. His wife Maria was granddaughter of William Drennan and grandniece of Martha McTeer, who we mentioned earlier. Maria, along with the other female members of the Belfast Reading Club, were part of a deputation that approached the Parks Committee in 1889. So here you see the Reading Club members actually actively participating in local events. Eldest daughter Ruth wrote several books of poetry. Ruth also addressed the Irish Literary Society in 1914 on the life of William Dritten. The chairman of the club, stating in his introduction that Miss Duffin, in conjunction with her sister, that's Celia, had recently published a small volume which showed that the poetic facility so strong in the Drennan family still flourished. Emma, not to be outdone, wrote The Magic Glasses and provided illustrations for Ruth's work. That's just a sample of information that you can find out about the people. Belfast Reading Club was unique. The members had the means to acquire their own texts, and there was no mention of any payments to maintain the organisation. This was not a society that was set up for philanthropic purposes, nor was it governed by any religious or political organisations. It was purely for the recreation of the middle and upper classes in 19th century Belfast. But the existence of this club is only known through the notebook contained here at the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. In recent years, there has been a resurgence in book clubs and reading clubs. The chosen texts may be read on the electronic screens, but reading books and discussing texts over a cup of tea or other beverage still occurs. We can imagine what the 19th century book club members must have experienced as they explored a text and discussed it with fellow readers. This paper has only covered a fraction of the information available about Belfast readers and where they obtained their reading material. Much more is known about the books borrowed, the readers, and the organisations that developed library facilities as part of their services. But I hope you have discovered that the 19th century's readers' needs were well catered for by the various book lending facilities in Belfast. As many of the 19th century book clubs met in the homes of members, it's still possible to discover some of the venues. However, the first free public library in Belfast, opened in 1888, still exists, although we know it as Central Library. The 20th century extensions of this building are to be demolished and a new extension built to create an area called Library Square. If those present on its opening day were to return, they might be startled by the rows of computers, the cafe and the scan-dishing systems. But the wrought-hand staircase, the display cabinets and the frontage of this iconic urban space would still be familiar 126 years later. Some things never change. Thank you.